Hi everyone, and welcome to week 3 of BUSS420 Project Management. And here's our checklist for the week. We have a number of different readings, a fantastic discussion, 2 assignments, and then a weekly reflection. Let's dive into the more interesting ones of these. Let's start with the readings for the week. We have the lectures up in Angel, but we also have Chapter 5 and Chapter 7 from our textbook on scope management and risk management. Let's take a closer look at each of these. What is project scope? As we learned last week, we know it's determined by the missions and objectives of the organization. But we simply can't achieve everything that we'd like to. We are constrained by the time we have and the budget or resources that are assigned to achieve those objectives. Each of those act as constraints and limit exactly how much project scope, how many of the objectives we can reach in a particular project. And the project scope can be viewed as a series of activities, and here you see I have illustrated this as a Gantt diagram. And we also know that we'll need a number of different resources in order to achieve the project scope. Ultimately, it is the deliverable, the quality products we produce, that are an embodiment of the project scope. In reviewing our textbook, and we'll be talking about it in discussion this week, what exactly is scope management? And I can tell you it's a simple set of sequential steps, one right after the other. And that first step is called conceptual development. In conceptual development, we're doing our information gathering, we're defining the problem statement, we're determining alternatives in our analysis, and finally selecting a preferred solution. Now the next step is to develop a scope statement. And that's a statement of work that contains the background and technical description, a work breakdown structure of what needs to be accomplished, in addition to the timelines and milestones that we'll have along the way. Once we've defined the scope, we'll need to get work authorization, which is a formal go-ahead and can be captured in terms of a contract and terms. The next step is reporting on the scope as we proceed with the project, and this involves collecting the types of information for regular reporting, including cost, schedule, and performance. And in order to achieve that successfully, we'll need control systems. And control systems control the way we make changes to the baseline and involve configuration, design, and a number of different documents to capture exactly what we're doing. And the last step is project closeout. Well, we'll capture all our documents for historical records. We'll go back to the team and collect lessons learned of those things that we'd like to repeat and those things that we'd like to avoid. And finally, financially closing out the project. Another aspect when reviewing that simple series of steps is when do these occur? When do we manage scope? If we overlay a standard product development life cycle, we know we have different phases such as initiation, planning, execution and monitoring, and closure. The first 3 steps evolve from initiation through project planning. Scope reporting and using our control systems is heavily involved in the execution and monitoring phases of a project. And then the last step, closure, project closure, occurs in the closure phase. No surprise there. Let's move on to Chapter 7 and review what exactly is a risk. And our textbook defines a risk as the probability of an event occurring times the consequence of that event if it were to occur. And oftentimes you'll see this entire formula laid out as a table. So let's take a real-life example and run through some different risks that may occur. Let's say our project is a party, a block party for the neighborhood. So it's not something that we're going to hold indoors, but something that'll be outside. And any time you have an outside event, well, there's always the risk of rain. Now, if we didn't have a rain date and we simply had to cancel the party, any of the food that we bought, well, it could possibly spoil. And if the weatherman told us there was a 60% chance of rain, well, we know the percentage or the probability of that event occurring. and then we can determine what the cost or the consequence of those spoiled items would be. And here we'll say it's $100 worth of bologna and cheese. That's a lot of bologna. Now what we can choose to do is to mitigate that risk and actually have a large tent erected so that no matter whether it rains or not, we can still conduct that party. In this case, there's a 0% chance that we'll cancel the party, but it comes at a cost. We'll have to order that tent and have it set up and taken down at a consequence of maybe $300. Now often you'll see risks plotted in a risk matrix, where along the x-axis you'll see that we have the consequence range, negligible, marginal, critical, and catastrophic, and then the probability range from rare all the way up to certain. And what we'll do is we'll plot our risks from the previous slide right here on this matrix. And of course we want to avoid or mitigate or work with those that are the most severe, those that are catastrophic and likely or certain. So here we'll plot the cost of spoiled items as, well, the consequent is negligible or marginal, but with a 60% chance of rain, it's possible or likely. And if we order a party tent, well, our probability range goes all the way down to the lowest, but it's at a greater cost or a greater consequence. And that's a general theme with mitigating risks. What you're trying to do is to lower the probability, but in order to mitigate the risk, it's going to come at an additional cost. So what is risk management? Well, just as we saw earlier, it's a simple set of sequential steps. And it all begins with risk identification. And that's where we classify risks. Maybe they're financial or technical, commercial, execution or legal in nature. And then we have different techniques to help us identify risks, such as brainstorming, using experts, or reviewing history. And after we've identified the risks, we'll need to analyze them. And that involves just what you saw earlier in this video, about determining the probability and consequence of each risk, and then plotting them in risk matrices. And for the larger risks, well, we'll choose to mitigate those. And possible alternatives are to accept the risk. We might not mitigate it completely, but minimize it. We can also choose to share the risk with other people involved in the project, or transfer it outright to maybe a third-party contractor. All sorts of ways to mitigate risks. And the last step in risk management is controlling it and documenting it along the way. We'll need a hardy or robust change management system, and we'll capture everything for historical records. When do we manage risks? Well, let's overlay the product development life cycle of initiation, planning, execution, and monitoring and closure again. And what you'll see is that we don't perform risk management once in a project, but we'll really go back and engage it during each and every phase of that entire product development life cycle. So we'll take all that knowledge that we learned in our lectures and our textbook and here in the video, and we'll hop into discussion on scope management. And here it asks you to discuss how the purpose of the work breakdown structure, as illustrated in figure 5.2 of our textbook, can help you with your team project. The second part of our discussion question asks you to discuss what steps a project manager should take from a risk management and a scope management perspective to prevent miscommunications and perception problems such as those illustrated in a cartoon that we'll be reviewing, and it's rather a famous cartoon. Lastly, I'll ask you to use your lecture notes and describe what scope creep means and how you would manage it within your project. And here is an illustration of that rather famous cartoon of what different parts of your organization view after having listened to a customer or a client's requirements. For those of you who have worked in a large organization where you've had product development or service development, I'm sure some of those pains will strike a real chord with you. Now our first activity for the week is really your first Microsoft project exercise, and this is due on day 7, which is Saturday by midnight Eastern Time. and you'll post your Microsoft project as an attachment in the Dropbox. Now in this assignment, act as if you've been selected as the new project manager to lead the ABC UPS process modification project. You'll need to recreate the work breakdown structure for ABS UPS project modification project provided in your textbook, and you'll be translating that work breakdown structure into your project schedule using Microsoft Project. Using the personnel table and responsibility assignments matrix from the textbook of the same case study, add the resources that match the appropriate tasks based on the area of expertise. Also, you'll need to include the appropriate predecessor and successor relationships so that the task lays out over time into a real project schedule. Now I've created a nice video right up there available through the Dropbox that you can access that should help describe the different steps required in order to create your first Microsoft project schedule. Now our second set of activities are risk management problems, and these are also due on day 7, which is Saturday at midnight Eastern Time, and you'll post up your Word document as an attachment in the appropriate Dropbox. Now here we'll have a number of different problems from Chapter 7. In addition, we'll have a Beijing EAPS Consulting Incorporated case study. Now that's a separate PDF that you'll find up there in the Dropbox. And you'll develop a risk management process using a methodology described in our textbook called PRAM. You'll analyze the risk process you have developed and answer the following questions. What are the advantages of developing and using a systematic risk management approach such as this PRAM methodology for this particular firm? And do you perceive any disadvantages of this approach? So that'll do it for week 3. We have a number of different readings, lectures, in our textbook chapters. We have a fantastic discussion on the work breakdown structure, miscommunications, cartoon or illustration, and diving into managing scope creep. You'll complete your first Microsoft project exercise, and we'll dive into some problems around risk management. Finally, conclude the week with a weekly reflection. And as always, if you have any questions along the way, you can email me at that address right there on your screen, or you can post something up to the appropriate forum up in our Angel Classroom. Thank you all, and let's have a fantastic week.